Yeah, as we have our first participants coming in, hello and welcome to the new series of Fighting Bulls. We have the fabulous Helen Adeosun from CareAcademy with us today, who's just trying to actually get her audio up and running. And we'll proceed in a couple of minutes. Brian, while we're at it, and we have already a couple of people in, what's the background of Fighting Bulls? Why did we start this series, and where do we want to help?
Look, this is, as you and I have discussed many times, this is my fifth economic crisis, second health crisis. I lived through SARS in Asia, and I, having been through those, I know one of the most important things is to keep a clear head, keep optimistic, and surround yourself with, it's always true, the people you surround yourself with, you're just a reflection of them. But this is as more than ever is important to surround yourself with positive ideas and reinforcement of it is possible to get through this and be stronger afterwards.
Yeah, and we really want to learn from the best entrepreneurs. So Helen, I think you're connected now, right?
Yes, I am.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for welcome on Fighting Bulls. I think we were just talking about why Fighting Bulls, why this series, and how can this be helpful. For us, this is really learning from the best entrepreneurs, not only from the Boston startup ecosystem, but even beyond, and really find out about some practical help on how to deal with this changed landscape. And I think I right now is one of the, and we just came out of a webinar with Clément from Techstars, who mentioned also you guys, so CareAcademy as a shining example of how to turn things around and how to be very nimble on your feet and how to adapt to the situation. We have 45 minutes, so this is about half an hour or 25 minutes of Brian and I asking some questions, and then we have about 15 minutes reserved for Q&A. So if you're listening, use the board down here with Q&As and let us know during the sessions to put your questions in so that we can answer them. We will either collect them for the end, or we will take them right away and put them or infuse them into the conversation with Helen. Now I think probably great time to start. Before I quickly hand over to Brian, my name is Christian Magel. I'm CEO and founder of Venture Lane, a Boston startup hub for early stage tech companies that we started over about 1.5 years ago. I'm dealing and I'm in contact with helping a lot of the startups here going through this crisis. Me myself, I've been through different, from .com crisis to the global financial crisis to stock market crisis. So I think I can bring some expertise to the table. And for me, together with Brian, actually was really important to unearth the great stuff and the great best practices from different entrepreneurs. Brian, you want to give a bit of background on yourself before we hand over to Helen?
Sure. So I started a company called Agile Sales Method, where I work with entrepreneurs and help them build their sales process and get sales moving from 0 to 5 million. I'm a mentor in residence at Techstars, where I first met Helen. And with that, I'd like to, it's my fifth crisis. My first was the Asian financial crisis through SARS, .com, et cetera. And with that, I'd like to just jump in and start interviewing Helen. Helen, can you give us a bit of background of CareAcademy, just what you do, how big your team is, where you guys are?
Absolutely. And I'll always just do a sound check. If you can't hear me, let me know. So Good so far? Awesome. Fantastic. So we are CareAcademy. We provide online professional development for direct care workers. I often get asked, who is a direct care worker? That encompasses a pretty big umbrella, folks who are really actually the heart of the crisis that we're undergoing sort of in these times of COVID, as I like to call them, but they include home health aides, CNAs, nurses are considered direct care workers. We also now talk a lot about community health workers, but folks who are out in the community who are providing ancillary health care services. They're typically called non-medical caregivers, but I believe that in these times, the lines are becoming very blurred. I think that as a result of what's happening right now, those lines will be blurred. But we actually provide support to those direct care workers and their employers via our training. So we provide these short, bite-sized training opportunities for direct care workers to upskill and learn very quickly the skills they need in order to help clients, specifically older adults. And also in this moment, those who are most impacted, or we're finding that are most impacted by COVID.
Helen, do you want to tell us quickly how big your team is and how long you've been around?
Absolutely. So we actually pivoted around the time that we met Brian at Techstars and Clement, who you mentioned earlier. CareAcademy pivoted from childcare and elder care, specifically only to elder care. And I'll talk also about the necessity of focus. That's something we learned pretty early on. It still drives us to this day. So we are now 22 people. We have some very ambitious growth goals over the next 3 years that translate down to even just 2020. But right now we're 22 people, mostly based here in Boston. I'm also in Boston. And most of our team, or a good size of our team, is also remote as well. So from anywhere from California, a lot of folks who are on the West Coast, and also include folks who are abroad in the Philippines and El Salvador.
Okay, awesome. And by the way, full disclosure, CareAcademy is a Venture Lane member, and hopefully proudly so. So we're really glad to have you here. Yes. Now all virtual. So yes. What's different, Helen? Like, how did COVID change the way you're interacting with companies, you're interacting within your company? What are the biggest changes that you've seen since this all started a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I'm part of different CEO groups, and a lot of my friends are also founders, and I get to be sort of on the front end talking with them about their companies and also seeing how they're reacting in the midst of this and communicating this to stakeholders. But I think that my outlook on what has changed is actually really best summed up by Ben Horowitz in his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. He talks a lot in the book about, peacetime CEOs and wartime CEOs. Usually that's predicated by financial crisis, right? Whether it's external or internally within the company, something changing, but within the guise of a company, it's usually financial crisis. For the moment that we're in, everyone, whether they benefit or they don't, is in the midst of a wartime, role, right? So I believe that effective as of the moment that, we had our first reported COVID death here in the U.S. on March 1st, incidentally, right? Very cleanly at the very top of the month, we all, and myself, all became wartime CEOs, right? And trying to figure out how to best communicate internally within our company, how to, and as I'm talking about it, I'm also becoming like a little bit like wow, like overwhelmed in terms of how much has changed and how fast. But literally on March 12th, 11th or 12th, I believe, one of our employees said, look, I'm hearing guidance around staying at home and what this thing is looking like. By that night, we decided to become an all remote team. And we actually on that Thursday, shortly after were all remote before orders came out nationally and federally. So it's changed a lot about how we imagine work happening. I've been trying to learn. I'm trying to learn from other founders from internally within our company on how do we motivate each other? How do we motivate folks within the company? We have a lot of external activities going on right now, and how do we communicate that out to our stakeholders, right? Whether they're investors or even our customers. So quite a bit has changed. I think also the speed and the expectation, how often you communicate to both stakeholders within and outside of companies has changed too. I will not mention them formally because I think they're in the midst of some issues, but even for the worst, a gym that I attend that is actually right down the street from Venture Lane is undergoing some issues because they did a very poor job communicating, to the world, right? And their gym, they're not directly sort of, you wouldn't think about them directly being involved in all of this, but they are in some ways, right? Their business is impacted, and people just wanted to hear from them. So I think it's changing the speed and the reaction time of thinking to execution and that's something startups are uniquely poised to be able to do, I think, in these times.
I have a question for you. What about the metrics? Have you changed the way you measure your business? I mean, obviously, we're going to remote overnight, and having to worry about people's health, and you're both your employees and the workers that you service. How does it change your metrics?
Yeah. Do you mean metrics in terms of like KPIs?
Well, the metrics and the way KPIs and the way you measure your business.
Yeah. No, that actually doesn't change, and for us, and I believe in the fundamentals. That KPIs are the things that are unerring that'll tell you some very hard truths about how you are doing. So litmus test, other than sort of how people are feeling and what's going on, that will be a truth bearer in terms of what do you need to change. So for us, the metrics stayed the same. For us, the metrics are the number of agencies that we work with. It is the number of folks who are enrolling in our classes. And it is the number of folks who are actually taking classes, right? And all of the revenue pieces that flow henceforth from those three basic, principles. So that it wasn't a very big truth teller. We learned pretty fast within days that, we have a direct sales model, and we learned really fast that people wanted supports that looked a very certain way. I.e. the COVID class that we ended up standing up within a week of actually us going to a fully remote team, and then some, right, in terms of supports. So those KPIs actually for us were very truth-telling in terms of how we needed to react on behalf of our customers. But those still stay the same, right? It's still, at the end of the day, as a mission and impact-driven business, those KPIs for us have directed the shift a little bit. It's not a huge change. I think in a lot of ways, maybe some companies, if you're a travel-oriented company or a retail-oriented company, your world had to change dramatically. For us, because we are an online education business in the midst of what's happening globally, it actually accelerated a certain part of our business and our business thinking and our outlook. There are certain things that are very short-term, but there are things that I also believe for the long term will meaningfully impact the way that this country does business, the world does business, especially when you talk about healthcare. So the KPIs really kind of stay the same. We just reacted differently to making certain numbers and things move.
What are your biggest challenges right now, Helen, that you're facing? And then have those challenges actually changed in the last 2 or 3 weeks?
I think speed is the challenge that I think that we're coping with just as well as everyone is coping with. Like, how soon and how fast do you react, and how do you shift ways in which you communicate and you do things to impact the business, right? I have very amazing and well-intentioned investors who are like, this COVID class, this should be everywhere. Do this everywhere right now, right? And I think, I was in a CEO group. It's a group that I belong to, and I think everyone, even folks who are well impacted by what's going on, are saying they're overwhelmed, right? Because now it's not even a matter of what you provide. Because you stand up something that is a benefit, there's the expectation of more, faster now, and an immediacy that you expect of yourselves. I think your employees also expect of you, and your customers. So it's riding this balance between speed, right? How soon do we get certain things out? What do we get out? And then it's also planning. If you're a very planning-oriented person, this is not a very kind situation, I think, to that kind of modality, because there's a lot that is like gut, right? At this
true
moment.
Masters come out there with planning, right? So now all about agility.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Maybe you have to plan differently. You have to plan faster. And sometimes it's not planning at all. It's just, let's get away from what we thought the world would look like. This is the way it looks like now. Within 24 hours, how do we react to this? And let's just make it go. There's certain decisions and things within the company that I've had to sort of stand up just to kind of get things going. But I think that folks have been tremendous in terms of, following suit and making things happen on the ground. And I'm very grateful for that.
Awesome. Can I ask you, so right now, I mean, you're in the midst of raising your Series A quite successfully. Tell us a little bit about like how the current situation actually has changed your approach, but also what you see out there in terms of investors. I mean, we have a bunch of entrepreneurs here on the webinar, and I'm sure some of them are looking into fundraising. What are the things that you can share and say, this is what's changed, this is how we did it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to answer this as best as possible, and I bet other people asking questions will help me dig down even further, and I'm happy to, because I think in this moment, I have benefited tremendously from people being very upfront and very as transparent as possible. So I will say this, and I hear this from not only other entrepreneurs, but I hear it from investors, and I hear it also from our legal team, that there is capital out there. This was not a slow crash, right, or a slow car crash, right? This was something, I mean, literally, it felt like a cliff where we jumped off a cliff and people didn't even realize it. And so the system is in shock, but there are folks who even now, and I'm not speaking necessarily even just about our particular situation, but funds included, who've raised a lot of capital and still have to deploy it, right? We see this in healthcare. There are lots of announcements. I mean, right between March 1st and now, right before then, you had so many announcements happening day by day, right? And I still see announcements. I think they've slowed down to a trickle. I think on the other side of that, though, if you have been fundraising, if you've got that process started off, and I will say this, we did start off our process almost a quarter before a lot of this took place. I think it's a good place to be to have gotten a lot of this done before what has happened. Things may have slowed down. I mean, we've had everything from investors having suspected COVID cases and beyond. But, I think the process has become much more efficient, especially for companies who can do a couple things. So I'll turn away from what is going on right now. I think there's a lot of capital out there. I think that folks are maybe a little slower to deploy just because everyone is still in shock, and people are trying to figure out what is happening right now, but it's there. And I think if you started off and communicated that you're undergoing a capital raising process before all this happened, and you've been just communicated, period, right? I think you're going to be okay. I will say, though, even in our case, for being fine and also capital raising right now, you have to over communicate. I can't stress that enough to not only customers and also into investors.
Good point, yeah.
For everything that we've even communicated to customers, I purposely put our investors on it. So we've been doing, for example, a weekly webinar series. I know I've had investors on those webinars because I want them to see that we are a company who has the ability to be forward-thinking and intentional, but also very nimble. And that's with or without COVID, that's going to continue, right? And how we communicate to our customers. I think that's just smart business practice overall, but now more than ever, it matters, for better or for worse, right? And I've lived through enough within CareAcademy where we've had to communicate for better or for worse where we are. But the sooner you do that, you know, the old truism is that a closed mouth don't get fed. So it's communicating early on to your existing investors and getting in line for any of the protections that the federal government has announced, and talking and communicating with even new investors, right? Because you never know, especially if you offer a solution that is benefiting or and you're not raising right now, even better. Start communicating right now. But I think communication and over communication, I can't overstate that, if anything.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, you're getting right now growth capital. What are you gonna do with hiring? Like in this, I can imagine, you know, the pendulum goes from, you know, super aggressive to, oh my God, we want to be very conservative. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, at the very outset, and even in this moment, I actually like passed around. So like the Friday it came out, passed around, or Thursday night, the Sequoia memo, right? And I forwarded it to investors who'd already, you know, were part of this conversation we're having about the Series A and said, what do you think about this, right? How do we react? And a lot of the feedback was, you know, even in you are a company uniquely positioned from where you are to impact, you know, what's happening right now, but then also the world is changing, right? So for us, it became more about going to our outsourced CFO we use, that's actually an outsourced CFO that works with a lot of startups, and say, we're in a really interesting place because I think we have to imagine, and people are going to ask us, and sure enough, that's what happened. How do you make this last? And how do you have an eye towards profitability? So I think, just to your last question, the world has changed a little bit. And even if you are, you know, a startup and you're raising growth capital, people want to hear more about your plans towards sustainability, right? That's the world that we're in. With or without COVID, I think economically we can all, you know, just rest on the fact that we were in a slowdown anyway. So the growth story, the WeWork story, the sexy, we're going to spend until, you know, and ball out till we fall out, that's not going to be the case anymore. You cannot raise with that story. Even the most growth-oriented, you know, highly positioned, capital-infused VCs will want to hear, how do you plan for the base, the best, and the worst case scenario, or the good scenario coming out of all of this, right? Whether or not you're positioned as an online education company or a healthcare company or whatever, you still have to have those scenarios in tow and show that as a leader, you can position your company based on that. In terms of what we plan to do, I'm a true believer, with or without COVID, that people and processes, not necessarily product, move a company, right? So, you know, you can have all the great products you want to. If you don't have people who have, like you both, been through this or seen it and can help you kind of position your company well, you won't make even the best of times work for you. So for us, this growth capital is a really great opportunity to go seek out people who can enact processes. I think that they're milestones that you go through as a company. We're very scrappy when we raised the seed round in 2017, right after Techstars. What I'm looking forward to, and I think my team is looking forward to, is bringing on more folks who've seen some things, who have done some things, who can best position us for growth in this moment. And I now have the ability as a leader of our company to go look for those folks and bring them into the company and infuse them and enable them to help us stand up, you know, and grow no matter how this works out, right, over the next couple of years.
Helen, You said you've gone to 100% remote overnight like everybody else, and like a lot of people, I'm sure can't wait to get back together with your team to share space and hugs and whatever it might be. Do you see the world differently afterwards? Where maybe, and I guess the first question is, what percentage of your team was remote before, and do you see it being different in the future?
That's a great question, and I'm still. This is not an answer that I have ready to like roll out as much, because I will. And I've also told my team this. So if anyone from my team is listening, that I'm not going to like spill any surprises. A while back, as we were just getting going, when we were probably just 3 or 4 people, an employee, a seasoned employee or a contractor rather. And I were having lunch, and he mentioned, he's like, I don't think I've seen companies who can be both remote and then also like in person, and do that really well. And so that kind of left me maybe with a certain bias. But I think by virtue of being the company that we've become, so just even a little bit of a fast forward to 2018, we brought in a sales team that came from largely another team, a competitor, and some other folks who are coming from the customer success side who were brilliant and remote as well. So we had no choice but to become kind of this mixed in-person remote company, and it's worked out really well. I think moving forward, I'm trying to kind of imagine what that looks like. We've learned a lot of things, and I think similar to a lot of our customers, I think we can do both really well if we're intentional about it. But I'm also trying to be aware of, our folks who are in person, who need some flexible time or may be actually way more productive at home. And how do we flex as a company and really push the bounds and get creative about how we communicate no matter where anyone is. So you're right, I am looking forward to coming in person, but I'm also seeing how our company reacts to and really molds itself around also being remote too. And I can maybe imagine us being much more at ease doing both and creating systems that enable both, or if we need to again, and I'm hoping not under these circumstances again, do just fully remote as well. So we're still figuring that out, but I'm really excited about what we've created to enable us from a communication perspective.
It's certainly going to break the rules, and I'm sure you're going to. I love that someone told you that there was a rule against it, and you've already found that it's no longer a rule.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You mentioned before, Helen, focus is one of the biggest character traits or the biggest abilities that you need to have. Are there 1 or 2 tips that you can share with other startup teams or other founders? How do you keep focus in a world that is changing like on a daily basis?
Very rapidly. Yeah, that's been a really interesting kind of back and forth. Like if you and the hard thing about hard things, and I love it. There's a set of questions that you ask in your one-to-ones, or Ben Horowitz recommends you ask in your one-to-ones, and one of those is like, what's keeping you up at night? This is a question that perennially keeps me up at night: is what do we focus on and why? I think. Well, I'll even start with the reason I said focus very early on, and we were at some point around 2015, 2016, doing both childcare and elder care. We're kind of going back and forth. And then I can always point back to a mentor, someone who had been in business for a while, was very good at it, who said, look, if anything, I'll say this about your business, like you have 2 opportunities. Whatever you need to do to prove those out very quickly, do those, but you can only decide on one thing. You can only do one thing extremely well. And I actually think that truism holds not only when we were just 2 people, but holds true as we're 22. Now, what becomes harder over time is what is the one thing, or what is the one thing that extends to the other thing, and how flexible are you, especially in a moment like this one. We are in the midst of our planning session, and I think that what becomes evident over time as you kind of go beyond that initial test execute, measure, and doing that cycle, is that sometimes you can over-focus. And I think that's where we got to a point maybe a couple months ago where we said, all right, so how do we kind of come up for air? And we had been a company at 22 people that was looking maybe a year out. And we saw the opportunity to kind of pull back a little bit more and say, how do we kind of open up the aperture a little bit? Doesn't mean that we necessarily unfocus. How do we really drive out what are we trying to do here, right? And so we spent last week even saying, not just 1 year out, not just a quarter out. Let's now, because we're, getting bigger, look at 3 years. What are the penultimate things? And I credit, he's probably watching this, but I'll credit him, Jay Bassett, in terms of just kind of helping us think and shape this. But the things that we want to do within 3 years, and then how do we tie back sort of our 1 year and then our quarter to those things? So the 3 year aperture really helps us take all of these disparate things that people were projecting on us or want us to do in the middle of COVID. All of these things helped us articulate this in a way that was succinct, that we could share it with our stakeholders. So we actually pulled back in order to articulate something, and something we believe in, something that we have to shoot for, and it gives us room to run. But then we've also, from a focus standpoint, said, all right, how do we distill that with time? Time is now the bound, right? So what we absolutely have to do now, COVID or no COVID, or with COVID, to actually get to that milestone. So I'm excited in that planning session that we said that COVID, we found ways where COVID was an ancillary to our business or some sort of waypoint that felt separate, but was actually a means potentially to get us to that 3 year outlook and our 3 year trajectory. So focus, I think, comes from planning. And if you plan big enough and you dream big enough, opportunities or moments or challenges like COVID are deciding points. They're just milestones in kind of getting to that bigger thing. And so that's kind of how we're growing our planning and our focus to be able to help this kind of.
The big picture helps you kind of prioritizing in the short term. Before Brian is asking you another question, just want to remind everybody, down there you have your Q&A button. Please give us the questions. If you have any questions for Helen, she's happy to answer.
The other is there a daily routine that you do every day that you could recommend to others that keeps you sane? You always have such a great outlook on life and so positive. Any advice you can give? Yeah.
I'll give advice for myself personally, and then also for like companies. For myself, I do devotional times. I'm a woman of faith, and so around 5:30 to 6:30, I spend some time reading scripture. I'm working right now through sort of like leadership, sort of under fire, and some of the devotionals around that, and and remind myself that bad times have come. As a company, we're old enough. We have a muscle memory of having gone through those times, whether they were internal or external facing, or times that have been overwhelming, and we've gotten through those, and other companies have too. And we will make it, and we'll be even better, I believe, as a result of that. And having that moment to just kind of have that outlook and go into my day with that, I think helps me function better as a leader. For our company, I actually credit our CTO, Yvonne Castellou. I love to see across different teams, we use Slack, how different managers kind of have nuances and rituals within their teams, and then, make those writ large for the company. So what we started doing a couple months ago, based on what his team was doing, was just even writing out what was our focus for the day. And I do it as well as, as CEO, because I think it helps also for me. It gives a level of transparency and accountability on what are the things that I'm going to work on today that really move the needle, and thinking about those before I articulate those. And then also, I think it also helps focus individuals too. So we do that as a ritual. We do these sort of blacked out stand-ups, right? So that whatever we've committed to, whether it's a quarterly goal or annual goal, what are we all individually doing that helps move the needle towards that direction? And I think that's been tremendously helpful for people to be like, oh, is that what you're working on? That's really interesting. I'd love to talk about that. So It's this great little thing that makes a huge difference.
I have a question here of Nick. He's asking, what would you recommend an early stage startup right now if they had to go out in the next 3 months and fundraise?
Yeah. Today, what you need to do is, I've only become better practiced and better versed in doing this, but I wish it's something someone had told me. If you have an advisory group, if you have a board that you talk to every quarter, pull them in, right? I think it's time to pull them in and utilize them to express that you all as a company will go out to fundraise, and you need to do that. And what that will do is just even communicating that and writing an email or getting together on a conference call will set in motion you as a priority in everyone's mind. And it's not only you as the founders who have that burden on your shoulders. If you have an advisory group, you have an investor group, you have a board, it now is their job as well, right? I'm going to put the nuts and bolts of it is, once someone's on your cap table, it's everyone's vested interest that you live, right? Truth, for whatever that means, you're married. So you bring together the family and make it the outlook that you're going to go raise in 3 months. And that will force a set of questions and some hard truths, right? That will mean that, have you tightened up as much as you need to? What are your goals around that money? Some things that you may have not thought about as CEO. When we went out about our fundraising process and started thinking about this like 8 months ago for Series A, it forced a lot of questions that I had to better answer before we went out for capital. And now, these days, you'll have to have those answers ready. Bring together the group, and then what you're also going to do is answer those questions or figure out what those questions are, and then put together an Excel sheet, or not even an Excel sheet, a Google Doc of who those people are going to be, the existing investors, the investors that make the most sense based on, what you're working on. And really, that is your CRM of investment, right? So within this week, by Friday, promise me that whoever you come up with on that list, you're going to start reaching out to, and you're going to start getting their heads out of the cloud, because I think 3 months from now, people will start maybe looking out again, but you got to get to the front of the line, right? So if you do that today, you put that list together by the end of the week, you make a commitment that everyone has got to go pull out all those people and find connections at all of those VCs and reach out to them on your behalf. And I literally had board members doing this for us, before COVID. That's a completely expected thing to do. If you make that a team effort, and then on top of it, the other thing that we did, and I'm glad I did it because I had to kind of talk a little bit about it, as much about it, to not make it too much of a distraction, but keep myself accountable. I'm all about accountability. Besides our board, I made it my own personal objective and key result that we would raise, around, and it would look like this, and this is how we're going to kind of utilize it too. And I think in this moment, you expressing that as a leader of your company, I think, helps people understand that, this is not just all rainbows and lollipops that you're trying to project, but you're actually taking the measures and means to make sure that you all survive this thing, right? And if that doesn't happen, you're held accountable, and there needs to probably be a plan B. But I think rallying the troops, getting your investors, whoever those stakeholders are, to at least talk about fundraising, brings up the right questions, brings up connections to potential people who could provide you help in that capital raise, and gets the ball rolling in process. You can't go out fundraising for 3 months out from now and start 3 months from now. You need to start today in terms of making that happen.
That makes
Nick,
sense.
she's going to follow up with you on that.
And we have Yvonne asking, you mentioned webinars and free content. How do you want to share best practice and what it did to you?
Is that our Yvonne who's asking, or is that another
I don't
Yvonne?
think so. No.
Okay. That'd be really funny.
I hope not.
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all. So in terms of webinars and free content, I think everyone is looking for help right now. My inbox is glutted up with, the sandwich shop down the street, the pizza restaurant telling me like what they're doing right now in the midst of COVID, right? And I think it's set forth this expectation that you've got to say something. So if you're not saying something, it's going to be very noticeable, i.e., I'm going to keep talking about it. You guys probably know who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to say their name. The gym that didn't say anything, right? Even though they've been closed for 2 weeks. So in terms of just free content, start at least with the basics. Say something. Say anything if you haven't said anything. Don't force it, because I think also now communication is very key. I see, or for the first couple weeks after some of the world shut down, I saw a lot of marketing that felt just completely devoid of any context, and if anything felt crass, right? Because they're trying to get me to buy stuff, and I'm like, do you not know what? And it's probably just, innocently someone's auto emails from HubSpot being sent out. But if you haven't done that stuff already, shut that off. Make sure you're talking to your sales and marketing team. No one really wants to hear that right now. And webinars don't have to be anything fancy, right? People are just grateful for information. If you're a relevant business that is doing something right now that actually pertains very closely to the situation, the webinars that we're standing up are not like we every Friday we figure out who the guests are going to be. By Wednesday, like we've got content up, shout out to our sales and marketing team and Jen. And by Friday, we go on air, right? And we talk about it. My co-founder does a medical update. She brings some of the best sources, and then we have people talk. In fact, what we've done, and I think that's been a really great help, we're experimenting as we're going, because we're, friendo y comiendo, like we're frying and cooking at the same time, as startups often do, is we are having some of the folks who are attending talk back to us and talk to each other while we're on the webinars. And that has been a huge differentiator. It's been awesome. I want to extend that out, and we're experimenting right now with content. But it's really great time, as people are not in the mode necessarily to buy, unless you have something that's very closely related, to experiment a little bit and give freedom to your marketing team to experiment and learn a little bit from your users. So stand up something. This doesn't have to be fancy, but you got to say something.
Awesome. Okay, got it. Brian, any last question?
I don't have anything, but thank you very much. Great to see you, Helen.
Great to see you, Helen. Thanks. And if I'm awesome content, great insights. Really love it. What you said is like, balancing the speed is a big one. Planning ahead. The 3-year outlook always helps you kind of bringing it back and keeping your priorities right, and that keeps you actually focused. And I love that your idea of like I'm a wartime CEO. How Definitely. Good is that? So how do I react as a wartime CEO, and how can I make this happen?
And I love how you brought your faith and you're getting grounded every day into it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your insight. Hope that was very informative for everybody. Ross, I don't know if we still have a quick slide for what's going on for the rest of the series. Right now, we're actually trying to do the Fighting Bull series on Thursday, 1 p.m. On a regular basis on every week. Ross, you want to quickly tell what we're still having on for Venture Lane? Or maybe I can say that we have a COVID-19 playbook. So how is that different from 2000 to 2008 with Paul Along and David? Both have been through those crises. We have Matt Toms from Bolt and Dan Heck, VP from OpenView, how to pitch VCs that want to and what they want to hear in the crisis. And then our next week, our Fighting Bull series coming. Brian, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, the CEO of YayPay, actually my old CEO, my former business partner of 3, we've worked together 3 times, will be on sharing. He's been through several crises before, also the Asian financial crisis, SARS, and the global financial crisis. And he'll be sharing what they're doing to fight their way through this.
And as always, you'll find an overview on the evangeline.com/programs events. Thank you, Helen, again for your insights. If anybody has any questions and want to reach out, get in touch with us at Evangeline, and we'll put you in touch.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, guys.
Helen.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.